So today we're going to be talking about growth, and people typically think of growth as a really good thing. And it is a good thing for a business, and we have phrases such as grow or die. So we're constantly talking about growth and how important it is. But there's a dark side to growth. And the dark side is that if you're not prepared for growth, growth will absolutely crush your company because it's going to exploit every weakness. So we're going to talk about what you can do about it. But before we get too far, I want to know a little bit about you. Like our transitions are very slow here. All right. So by show of hands, raise your hand if you are, have been, or aspire to be a business owner. All right, so raise your hand. Please keep your hand up unless you have received formal training in how to run a business. Not in a discipline of a business such as accounting or marketing, but how to run a business. Okay, so look around. A lot of people still with their hands up. So a lot of business owners, you can put them down now. A lot of people who are, have been, or want to be business owners who've not been formally trained to run a business. All right. So a little bit more audience participation. Just kind of shout out for those of you who are or want to be business owners, why do you want to have your own business? Just kind of shout out.
Independence. That is the number one.
Okay, independence.
To sleep in.
To sleep in. What else? Anything else? What was that? Okay, solve problems. Okay, great. So keep those things in mind. Keep in mind the number of people who want to be business owners or are business owners who've not been formally trained to run a business. And then keep in mind some of the reasons people want to start a business. We will go back to that. So a couple of other things related to business owners. I found some stats, and less than 30% of business owners have a degree in a business-related field. 2/3 of business owners self-report that they feel underprepared in some significant aspect of running their business. So it's fairly common. All right, we're going to move to my favorite subject, which is me, because I am the world's foremost expert on me, and if I'm standing up here, I should probably tell you a little bit about myself. So I never intended to have a business career. I did undergraduate work in theology and philosophy, did doctoral work in biomedical sciences, never intended to have a business career. In fact, when I was doing my philosophy degree at a small liberal arts school, I teased the business majors. Like, we're going to change the world because we deal with the universe of ideas, and this is just high-priced vocational school for you. So God has a sense of humor because all these years later, here I am talking about business. So I stumbled into a business career, was very fortunate that I had bosses who advocated for me. They mentored me, they put me under mentors, put me in a lot of training, and it was great. And I loved my business career until I didn't. I got burned out on the 80-hour work weeks as a lifestyle, burned out on the travel, the politics, all of that. And I've always loved construction. I've always loved working with my hands. So in 2013, I decided I couldn't do the corporate thing anymore, and I started buying and renovating historic houses. And some of my favorite days of my career were wearing a tool belt, working side by side with really great contractors and tradespeople. But I noticed a theme, and these people were all really smart, they cared about quality, they were a blast to work with, but their businesses just kept cycling. They'd do really well, and then they'd do poorly, and they'd do well, and they'd do poorly. And unfortunately, a lot of these people ended up shuttering their business because they just couldn't sustain it. And I thought, well, there's an opportunity for me here to work with people I really appreciate, really respect, and enjoy. And I could leverage my business background to help companies like that. So for a while, I ran a business that I focused on working with residential remodeling companies. And basically what I did is I provided a framework and a playbook for businesses. My wife encouraged me. She said, what you're doing is applicable outside of residential remodeling. Why don't you consider expanding? And so I did, and I started Stage 3 Group, and we'll talk about that. All right, so that's my background. Fortunate to have stumbled into a business career, had great training, and love working with small companies. All right, so I think that growth is great unless you have certain situations. And I think that there are 4 factors that when they converge have the opportunity to crush a business. And so they are the business life cycle, the structure of a business, background of the owner or the leadership team, and then complexity. So let's explore each of these in a little bit more detail. So the first thing related to stressing out a business with growth simply has to do with the business life cycle. There are 5 stages. The 5th stage of a business is decline and death. I'm not interested in talking about that, so we're going to limit it to the first floor. So let's say that you have an idea for a product or a service, or maybe you want to be able to sleep in, so you decide to start your own business. And so that is the startup phase. I refer to that as the infant of the business. So you're newly launched, you don't have a lot of money, but you have a lot of ambition and ideas, and you're trying to acquire your first customers, improve the viability of your product or service in the marketplace. And the challenge of a stage 1 company is simply surviving. All right, well, let's say that you get a little bit of traction and you start growing, so you enter stage 2, which is the growth phase. That I refer to as the childhood phase of a business. So at that point, you're probably chasing opportunities, and you may think that your product is here, but you see an opportunity over here, and you chase that, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you're chasing opportunities. Operations and finances tend to be a little bit sloppy in this part of the business life cycle. And I see a lot of organizational multitasking in this phase of the life cycle. What I mean by that is that you tend to have people who are wearing multiple hats and doing multiple responsibilities, oftentimes things for which they're not qualified. So the founder of the company may be focusing on the product or the craft of the business and also being the one doing the bookkeeping, maybe without any qualifications. The main salesperson may somehow know a little bit about computers, and so they become the de facto IT department. So I see that a lot. The challenge of a stage 2 company is trying to get stuff done, and usually without enough resources. All right, well, the goal is to eventually get to stage 4. This is the maturity phase. I refer to it as the adult business. So at this point, the business more or less has things figured out. You have defined processes, you have defined roles, you have people who are qualified for the roles that they're filling. And what you're trying to do here is maximize. So maximize investment, your ROI, maximize revenue, maximize efficiency, and so forth. So this is a good place to be. Unfortunately, to get to stage 4, you have to go to stage 3. Someone asked me about the name of my business, Stage 3 Group. We focus on helping companies get through the 3rd stage of the business life cycle. So if you've been to one of the Tiger Talks where I was sitting in the audience, you probably heard me introduce myself, something along these lines. I work with businesses to help them move from unruly teenager to mature, productive adult. And this is what I'm referring to. So I think that stage 3, they're like the teenage years of the business. So like a typical teenager, they can be a little bit unruly. They're often very busy, somewhat predictable or moody. Sometimes they feel out of control. And at the same time, they've acquired a lot of knowledge, a lot of wisdom, so there's a lot of good there as well. It's usually at this point of the growth life or the business life cycle that the owner realizes, I need to bring in other people. I can't handle this thing all on my own. And so the challenge for people in the expansion or stage 3 of the business life cycle is dealing with the strain of growth. Okay, so that's the first factor that can contribute to growth crushing a business. The second factor has to do with the business structure. So most of you have probably seen this before. This is Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS, from the book Traction. Traction has sold 1 million copies or more, and it's helped a lot of businesses establish order and to move forward. So with this concept, business is understood in terms of the parts or components. And if you can't see it, the parts or components include things like vision and people and data. I've had a lot of, the idea behind it is that if you strengthen the components, you will have a well-running company, right? I've worked with a lot of companies who tried to implement Traction, and it may not have worked for them. So I have a slightly different approach or a different understanding of what business is and how it's organized. And so this is my 3 functions model. And I think this is true whether you are a one-person startup or whether you are a Fortune 50 organization. I think that business can be understood in terms of 3 essential things. They are product making, customer getting, and navigating. So product making is simply producing the product or the service that the company sells. I refer to it as the craft of the business. Customer getting is getting people to pay for the product or service that you sell. So it's sales and everything upstream of sales. And then you have this thing called navigating. And this would include things like policies and procedures, financial management, strategy, operations. I would refer to it as the business of the business. All right? So I think any business can be understood within this model, and the goal here then is to strengthen these core activities in the way that they integrate with each other. And I think that's the way to have a healthy business. So anyhow, part of this challenge of growth is the business structure itself, and we'll come back to that. All right, the third factor has to do with the background of business owners. So think back a few minutes when I asked how many of you had training in business. Not many of you had been formally trained to run a business. A lot of people don't necessarily have degrees in business. So I work with a lot of business owners, and I always ask a business owner when I meet for the first time, why did you start your business? These are the answers that I typically hear. So number one, in my experience, is they want to focus on their craft. They've been working with a company and they think that they can do it better. They have an idea for what they want to do. The other things are kind of lifestyle. They don't like having a boss. They want to be flexible in their schedule. They think they can have financial independence and so forth. So they break down into these two categories, either the craft of the business or lifestyle. So again, I work with business owners a lot. I talk to a lot of them. I ask this question all the time. And there's one response I've never, ever heard, and it's this. No one ever started a business to focus on navigating tasks. I've never talked to a business owner who said, man, I love creating policies and procedures so much, I decided to start a construction company. Now I can focus on policies and procedures all day long. Or, man, I love bookkeeping. I love it so much I started a marketing firm. Now I can do bookkeeping all day long. No, people start a business primarily to focus on the craft of the business. All right, that's another factor in how businesses can struggle under growth. The fourth factor has to do with complexity. The problem with growth is that growth brings complexity. So when you start your business, let's say you're a residential remodeler, you don't have a lot going on, you can keep track of the books in Excel, it's not that hard, but growth brings complexity. All right, so not only did no business owner ever start a business to focus on navigating, the ones that I work with typically don't like the tasks associated with navigating, and frankly, most aren't very good at them, and that becomes a challenge. So as I said before, all three functions become a little bit more complex as the business grows. So let me tell you a story. There are two brothers and they work for a remodeling company. Their boss is kind of a jerk. They think they could do it better, so they go out on their own. We're going to call it Remy Construction. So they form Remy Construction and they decide that they're going to focus their work on renovating bathrooms. They can finish a bathroom in a couple of weeks. The sales process is pretty simple. And they don't really do any marketing, but they have a big network of friends and family. And so they put word out. The friends and family start calling them, and they start doing bathroom remodels. Well, wouldn't you know it, they do really good work. Word gets out, and they start getting phone calls from people they've never heard of. Business grows, and so they decided they need to hire a couple of additional craftspeople. So each brother is now paired up with one of the people they hired, and they're continuing to do bathrooms. They're just doing more of them, and they're doing them for people they don't know. Well, wouldn't you know it, word continues to grow, and they get more and more calls. They build a larger team, and they're doing bathroom remodels. Until one day, a previous client calls them and says, hey, we loved what you did for our bathroom. We think it's time to remodel our kitchen. Would you consider doing that? So they get together, they consider that and say, yeah, we can do that. And they start remodeling kitchens. Again, they do really good work. They're great to work with, and the phone keeps ringing and the business keeps growing. So fast forward 3 years. What began as two brothers doing bathroom remodels has suddenly grown into a full-service residential remodeling company. They're doing bathrooms, they're doing kitchens, they're renovating basements, they're building decks, they're putting on additions, they're doing whole house remodels. So things change quite a bit. The product making has gotten more complex. They could do a pull and replace bathroom in 2 weeks. Now, if they're doing a whole house remodel, it may take a year or more to do. So they're now working with architects and engineers, and they're putting together plans. They had to get software to manage all of that. The material planning and budgeting has become a nightmare. But it's worked out because this is their craft and they've been able to figure it out. Well, likewise, sales has become more challenging as well. They never did any marketing. They decided to put up a website. They started doing some SEO. But it was a really easy sale when you were just doing a bathroom and it was $15,000 and it was a 2-week project. But now, some of their projects cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and they take as long as a year to do. So they have to have a very complex contract that they work with. Sales has become a longer period of time. They have to work out things like payment milestones and financing and all of this, but they've been able to figure that out. The problem for the brothers is that things have gotten more complex in the navigating component as well. They used to just work, the two of them, and then one-on-one with other people, but now they have a team of people, and they're running all over the city. They have to track them down. They had to put together an employee handbook. They had to figure out how they onboard people. They're dealing with a lot of financial issues. They didn't know how to do accounting, really, but now they had to implement QuickBooks. They spent a lot of money on construction management software, but they're not sure they're using it very well. Turns out they don't really know if they're profitable or not either. And they suspect, but they can't prove, that some of their people are out buying materials and then not logging it into the system. And so they don't really know whether their jobs are profitable or how profitable they are. The brothers are working all kinds of crazy hours. They feel as if they're in over their head. They're stressed out. They go home, and unfortunately, they take their stress at home. They snap at their spouses and children. And the reality is, the idea of owning a business was much more fun than the reality of running a business. And that's how that's how growth can break a company. And I've seen it over and over again. So my contention is that as these things get more and more complex, you need to have a deliberate focus on the navigating component of a business. Because if you don't, you're going to have something like this. Uh-oh, looks like someone skipped leg day. So for those of you who aren't gym people, skipping leg day means you're really buff, like from the waist up you are super muscular, but you're kind of scrawny and not sure if you can support yourself. So if you leave today's presentation with nothing else, I want you to remember this. Don't let your business skip leg day. All right, so you saw my 3 boxes: product making, customer getting, navigating. I think in reality, it looks more like this. Like product making and customer getting, those get all the attention, they're above water. But this is such a huge component. And obviously you have to have a good product, you have to be able to sell, but assuming you're doing those things well, if you're not running well here, the business can implode. All right? So what now? If you're a business owner, how do you manage growth and the complexity that comes with it? Well, here what I see is the challenges of growth. The first thing I see is that people, processes, and systems can be overloaded. When you start a business, you're just trying to prove that you're viable. As you grow a little bit, you're just trying to get work done. You're probably not paying a lot of attention to your processes or systems. That's okay for a while, but then growth can really crush those things. Culture shifts can be difficult. I have seen this a lot. I've seen a lot of companies navigating stage 3 of the business life cycle, and they have retained a lot of early stage employees. The problem is things are different for those employees. They loved it because early on, hey, we feel like a family. I get to do a lot of different things, some of which I'm maybe not qualified for. And what I've seen is that in those cases, a lot of times being busy is enough. Like if you look busy, you look like you're being productive. Well, suddenly the business changes and you have people in specific disciplines, so they're not wearing all the hats they used to wear and they liked wearing. Suddenly they're held accountable for results, not just being business, and they don't like it. And I've had a number of clients talk about, or employees within the client base talk about, it's not fun anymore. You're ruining the business. It used to be a family, it was fun. And now they're accountable and they don't like it. So I've seen people resist, whether intentionally or unintentionally, the maturing process. Urgency can lead to bad decisions. I've seen this as well, where situations pop up under growth that you never anticipated. Owners have to make decisions in the spur of the moment, and it can lead to bad decisions. So those are some of the challenges. So what are your options then? What do you do if you're facing these challenges? Well, one option is to simply limit growth. You don't have to be a growing company. I guess there's nothing wrong with that. Could be challenging though, because you're gonna have competitors who are probably focused on growth. Some of the better employees that you might bring in are probably gonna wanna work for a growing company. So that has its challenges. Second option, you simply power through it. You just work long enough and hard enough, and eventually you're gonna get through stage 3 and you're gonna be a mature company. A lot of companies have done that. The other option is to increase the power and effectiveness of navigating. So I know there are other consultants in here, and I think we all do the same thing. We simply compress the time frame to get through navigating with a series of tools and support. So that's an option as well. All right, I should probably mention coaching. And so I don't want to say anything bad about coaching, but almost every client I've worked with has previously worked with a coach and it didn't work. So rather than saying coaching doesn't work, I want to explore why it didn't work. And the number one reason is that the business owners called a coach when things were not going so well. No one calls a coach to help when things are going well, right? So things weren't going well, the business owner felt overwhelmed, they thought they should call in a coach, and the coach just piled more work on them. Well, here's some ideas, do this. Here's more, do this, do this. Almost every client I've worked with had that experience, and they stopped using a coach. I do coaching in my practice, but only if the business can handle it. I do not want my reputation tarnished by taking money from a company where coaching won't work. So if you're gonna use a coach, this is how to make it successful. Make sure you have an in-house team who can support the efforts that you're gonna be required to do by the coach. If you're gonna do it all yourself and you're already overwhelmed, it's probably not a good idea. Implement rhythms to do the work, set aside time to do things, and then if possible, get in the trenches support. Either the coach or someone else, bring them in to help execute what the coach is telling you to do. All right? All right, so help with navigating. I accidentally wrote a book. Here it is, it's called Stage 3 Success, and I'm not gonna do a big self-promotion. If, however, you wanted to go to Amazon and buy the book, I would not be disappointed. And if you wanted to leave a review, I'd be even less disappointed because that's how people sell books. All right, so I use this line a lot. I accidentally wrote a book. And people say, what do you mean you accidentally wrote a book? Well, it was never my intention, but in a 2-week period, I had 6 business owners say these words to me. I don't know how to run my business. And usually it was preceded with something like this. I know how to, and it was related to the craft of the business. I know how to remodel a house, but I don't know how to run my business. I know how to develop killer code, but I don't know how to run my business. And so finally, after the 5th or 6th person said this to me, I thought, well, I should find out what they're talking about. And so I said, what do you mean when you tell me you don't know how to run your business? And they responded with things like this, like, I don't know how to spend my time. I don't know how to organize my schedule. What information should I look at? Where do I find it? What's it telling me? What do I do with it? Here was a big one. Like, I don't know if I'm making money. Other than logging into the bank account every once in a while and looking to see if there's money, I have no idea if I have money. They weren't able to see what's upstream and what's coming in or going out. They never knew. What meetings do I have? How do I hire and onboard? All of these things that are really kind of basic blocking and tackling for running a business. And then I realized, you know what? If I hadn't had the opportunity to be trained and mentored, I would have had these questions as well. So because I have a degree in philosophy, we're kind of weird. What do we do? Well, we think and we write. And so I sat down and I started writing responses to some of these questions. And I figured that I would just have blog posts or maybe some white papers that I'd share. And at the end of the first day, I was surprised that I had written 30 pages. And I still had more. Came back the next day, wrote 20 more pages. So in 2 days, I had cranked out 50 pages. It slowed down significantly after that. But that's how I accidentally wrote a book. So it was in response to some of these basic blocking and tackling questions. And in fact, at one point, I thought, this is so basic. I don't know if I should even continue this, but here it is. So where I landed in the book, it's basically divided into 4 parts. One part is a lot of stories of people who got into trouble and people who did things well. But the most part, I contend, and this is how the book is organized, as a business owner, there are things you need to know, there are things you need to monitor, and there are things you need to do. All right, as a business owner, what do you need to know? I think you need to know your business plan. Who are you? What are you all about? What's your market? All of that kind of stuff. All right? All of you should have a business plan, and you should use it. You also need to have a budget as well. So a budget tells you what you're going to spend your money on. You need to understand your value and your differentiation. And finally, I hate to tell you, but business is a numbers game, and so you need to know something about financial statements. You don't need to be a CPA, you don't need to know a lot about debits and credits necessarily, but you need to understand what financial statements are and how and the information they're telling you. So the first three of these in aggregate, I refer to as guardrails. They're guardrails for your business. How so? Well, a business plan should tell you what to do. Probably more important, it should tell you what not to do. I've seen a lot of businesses get in trouble because this is the pathway they're on and they're headed here and they see a shiny object over here, a shiny opportunity, and they pursue it and they get into trouble. They don't have the infrastructure, the capital, whatever it is, they lack something and they get into a lot of trouble. So the business plan is a guardrail because it tells you what not to do. In the book, I refer to things as upside goggles. Like, you business owners are so optimistic, you see an opportunity and you think it's the best thing in the world, and you put your opportunity goggles on, your upside goggles, and you don't see the downside. So that's why your business plan is important. It needs to be a guardrail. The same is true with your budget. It should tell you not only what to spend money on, but what not to spend money on. If it's not in the budget, don't spend it, unless you move something around in the budget. But again, I've seen a lot of companies like, oh, this is such a great opportunity, we're going to pursue this and spend money, and it comes back to bite them. I've seen it a ton. Financial statements, I refer to those as the report card of your business. And so it's telling you how effectively you're managing your business, how healthy your business is. All right, so those are the things you need to know as a business owner. Next, there are things that you need to monitor. So I was a pretty disciplined student. Grades were super important to me. And I never walked into the final exam without knowing what I was likely to get for the semester. Why? Because I monitored the whole time. I could tell you what my quiz score average was, what my test score average was, my project scores, whatever they were, whatever component went into my final grade, I monitored that throughout the semester. And if a grade started to slip in an area, I would jump on it and take corrective action. What's the same thing in your business? If your financial statements are your report card, shouldn't you be monitoring the things that go into your final grade? And if they start to slip, take action on that? So we do that with tools like dashboards and scorecards, forecasts, pipelines, and so forth. So that's what you need to monitor. And then there are things that you need to do. So the first of these is BEHU, and that is an acronym for best and highest use. I want my customers to always be asking, what is the best and highest use of my time and talent? What is the best and highest use of the company's resources? I see so many business owners just wasting time stuffing things into QuickBooks and all of that, when really that's not a great use of their time. So what's the best and highest use of your time? I recommend that you have personal rhythms for when you get things done, have company rhythms, and all of these things. So know, monitor, and do. And I think that will get you a long way in business success. So what I realized after I wrote all of this is I had created a framework and a playbook. So the framework is simply the structure and the tools to run a business, and then the playbook is simply executing your framework. All right, so framework, kind of a mix of these things, playbook, a mix of these things. All right, I like simplicity, so I think you can run a business in 4 steps. These are the steps I follow when I begin working with a client. We assess and dream. Where is the business? Where do we want the business to be? We implement the framework, we implement the playbook, and we rinse and repeat. So let's look at each of these in a little more detail. Assess and dream. I think it was Collins in Good to Great who said, confront the brutal facts. Usually people don't call me because the business is going so well, they are looking for new ways to spend money. Usually it's because the business is in trouble. One of the most difficult things about what I do is getting people to admit where they really are, because there's so much shame. Like, I swear, half the time I feel like a therapist. Like, no, your craft is remodeling a house or whatever it is, not navigating. Like, there's nothing to be ashamed of. But I require people to really address the reality of the business. What are the financial realities of the business? What's the culture like? What's the team like? How are the products and services performing, and so forth? And once we deal with that, then we look at the dream. So if I had a magic wand and I could go, bing, your business is exactly what you want it to be, what would that look like? So we talk about the same things. What would it look like from a financial performance perspective? What would the culture be like? How would you spend your days? What's your exit strategy? So we create a current reality, and then we plan to a future reality. Step one. Step two, build your framework. So again, I am big on guardrails. The first thing I do anytime I go into a new business is we put the guardrails together or refine them if they have guardrails. We look at reverse engineering the report card. If I want to get straight A's in these categories, what factors go into them? And we build the pathways for those things. Other things related to the framework. So I will lead strategic planning sessions with my clients. We will review strategy every year. And hopefully these are a little gift to you. These are some of my favorite questions that I work through with clients. So the first one is, why do people spend money with companies that do what you do? Why do people spend money with you as opposed to someone else? Why do people give money to your competitors instead of you? And so forth. And some of these may seem like a throwaway question. My wife is a residential architect. She's here today. And we worked through this. So I would challenge you, if you go to any residential architecture website or any residential remodeler website, they would look very, very similar. They would have an about us, here's our story, here's our methodology, here's this, here's that. They'd all be the same. They'd all have a ton of pictures of pretty bathrooms and kitchens and so forth, and it would be hard to tell them apart. So we spent quite a bit of time working through this. Why do people spend money with people who do what you do? And this is where we landed for her business. It's because their spaces no longer work for them. So her practice is in Washington, D.C. She works with very affluent clients. Their project budgets for remodeling are often well above $1 million. And people, I don't care how wealthy you are, you're probably not going to spend $1 million just to make your kitchen prettier. And so where we landed is the spaces no longer work. Part of that may be that the kitchen isn't pretty enough, but we discovered there are things like aging in place. How do you deal with the space when you're starting to age? Or you're bringing in your older parents who need a place to live. Or you start a business and you need to entertain clients in your home. All kinds of reasons, but what we determined is, again, the space is no longer working. Well, that seems like a subtle difference, so what's the big deal? The big deal is that you can then talk in terms of what the client's need is. What problem are you trying to solve? And I guarantee that if I go up against a competitor and they're just showing pretty pictures, but I'm getting to the heart of their need, I have a competitive advantage. Not just in the sales process, but in how I manage the project altogether. So anyhow, these are some of the questions that I work through with people when I do strategic planning and annual strategy review. Hopefully there's something in there that's useful for you. And I believe that success in your business often lies in the questions you ask and the persistence in which you ask them. All right, related to building your framework, assess holistically. So this is a big thing. I'm a big pictures person. I have a client and they were thinking about expanding their business and they had like 4 different options that they were considering. So what we did is we simply worked through what are the most important things for you, like profit, cash flow, competence, risk management, all of that. And we just, again, with a series of questions, drilled down and then we presented it graphically. It's much easier for me to see what we should be focusing on if I have a picture. All right, so hopefully that's helpful as well. And then finally, you need to run your playbook. So again, best and highest use of time and talents. I'm a big believer, not just in time management, but time and energy management. I tend to be an early morning person. I get up really early. I have a lot of energy. That's when I do my creative work. When I was in the corporate world, I'd get to the office about 6 o'clock. It was great. No one else was there. And I stupidly made the mistake of spending that time checking email and responding. Big waste of time, because by the time I was done with that, I was kind of drained. So I learned, use my energy. I could do creative, strategic tasks, times of high energy. When I'm not feeling as energetic, then I do more mundane tasks. Drive framework defined goals. So this is a tool, GSTS framework, stands for goals, strategy, tactics, and steps. So I always require clients to have a couple of goals every year that they pursue. You probably know a lot of companies, maybe your own, where you have goals and they don't really get achieved. And I would say it's probably not due to the lack of hard work or not having good people. It's because you don't have a structure to enforce your goals. So every goal is supported by a strategy. So here's my goal. What are the strategies to support that? How are you then going to achieve your strategy? You name that by the tactics you're going to implement. And then we take that all the way down to the individual steps which have dates and resources assigned to them. And let me tell you, it is a pain in the arse to do this. It just is. It takes a lot of time. It's a lot of work. But it's less difficult to do that than to year over year just not accomplish your goals. All right? So I recommend having a framework defined set of goals that you work toward. Other things related to the playbook here, listen to the stories in your data. So we do deep dive financial analyses every quarter. I'm a big believer in charts and graphs. These lines here are moving averages, and they mean things when they cross over each other. But beyond that, I use key performance indicators. So I extracted this from a real life client that I worked with. And in their industry, they had revenue per employee or full-time equivalent. This is one of my favorite KPIs, key performance indicators. How much money is the company generating per full-time equivalent? Shows how efficiently the business is operating. So in their industry, revenue per FTE target was about $225,000 per FTE. Based on what was going on in the business, we set a target of $216,000 that year. And you can see how they performed. Quarter one, not too bad. And then it started tanking. Like, what's going on? Well, first of all, the picture, it was much easier to see that something was problematic here. And we kept asking questions, and the situation was this. Revenue was growing overall. They were making more and more money, and they were struggling to meet their deadlines. So what did they do? They brought in more employees. Still not enough. More revenue, brought in more and more employees. And what we determined as we analyzed this is that there was one project manager who had two responsibilities. One, he was responsible for getting projects out the door. Two, he was the go-to guy to onboard and train new employees. Well, he was so busy trying to get his projects out the door, he'd bring new people in and not train them. And so efficiency fell. So again, stories and pictures are fantastic. Revenue per FTE, one of my favorites. All right. Step 4, review, revise, repeat. Why? Because nothing ever goes according to plan, does it? And things change. Simple as that. I had my first boss said, business is easy, 4 steps. Make your plan, work your plan, evaluate your plan, make a new plan. That's all it is. All right. Okay, so you're hearing this and you say, well, I'm an owner and I hate navigating. I may not be that good at it. What do I do? What do you focus on? Well, first of all, as we've determined based on the show of hands earlier and based on the stats, if you're a business owner, you've never been trained to run a business, you're typical, right? I would contend that the best and highest value you bring to your business is what you are wired to do. And it's probably related to the craft of your business. So I had a husband and wife team in Cincinnati. They were clients, and they did high-end renovations. They would renovate historic mansions in greater Cincinnati, like 6,000, 10,000-foot historic mansions. Beautiful, beautiful work. Their work had been featured in magazines. Doug was an absolute master craftsperson, did great work, great with customers. They were fantastic. But the company wasn't doing well. He couldn't gain control of the employees. There were just some things that were kind of squirrely. And he and I were having a one-on-one. And I said, Doug, you need to change your mindset. You're no longer a craftsperson. Like, you need to think of yourself as a CEO of a boutique remodeling company. We talked through that, and I watched him as he slumped down in his chair. And he said, yeah, I guess you're right. I guess I need to teach myself how to use Excel and stay in the office. I'm like, whoa, 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 no, absolutely not. Like, why are you saying that? Well, if I need to be the CEO, that's what CEOs do. I said, that doesn't have to be that way. The best and highest value you bring to your organization is your amazing craftsmanship, your mastery of historic construction techniques and so forth. Like, there are people you can bring in. You're still the CEO, but you can bring people in to focus on the navigating. So his whole body language changed when we had that discussion. So again, my recommendation, focus on what you do best, which may not be related to navigating. So being an owner does not mean that you have to lead navigating, but someone does, and they better know what they're doing. I've encountered this before. The struggle with early stage companies is they hire families and friends. Don't do it. But like my cousin's neighbor has a degree in accounting, we'll bring them in to do it, and it doesn't work. So have someone focus on navigating, make sure they're competent. Okay, so to summarize, I believe, yes, growth brings complexity, all kinds of stresses, but growth, you can manage it well if you focus on navigating. And I think you just have a good framework and a good playbook. So thank you. And if you remember nothing else, don't let your business skip leg day. All right, if you want to...